thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Jay, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm really excited to have you because I was reading through your bio and it says a member of the Business Failure Club. That's a very unusual way to start a bio. Tell me about that.
Sometimes I just think you have to just accept what has happened and own it and make sure you're learning the lessons from it. And so I think by always telling people I'm a member of the Business Failure Club, it gives me a chance to define that label without that label being defined for me. It gives me a chance to obviously own what happened with my business failure, but at the same time, use it to my advantage and for motivation kind of moving forward. So I know a lot of people are like, you shouldn't use the F word. And I'm like, no, in this case, it fits. I mean, it fits perfectly. There's no way to sugarcoat this or, use mistake. I'm like, no, like when your business fails and you have to go get a job because it's financially taxing when your business fails. And then of course it's mentally and emotionally draining and the blow to your ego is brutal. Mm-hmm. You just need to own it, right? I mean, you just need to call it what it is. The business failed. I had to go get a job. And so I think that I always try to let people know straight out of the gate, like I am not perfect at this. And when I tell people I've actually started a couple of businesses, I always say it's not because I'm good at it. It's because it took me a couple of times to figure it out.
That's great. And I love that we're starting off with that because I think that level of transparency and just reality, frankly, is really important, especially in today's like Instagram entrepreneur life, reality, fantasy land. Mm-hmm. And so, when you're thinking about just that, for example, like we can, any of us can open up our Instagram accounts, our Facebook accounts, or even LinkedIn and see all these people who are just so successful and they have all the things and they're doing everything right and everything's great. And if we could just run our businesses like theirs and, how have you has that ever been an issue for you? How have you overcome it if it has? You talked about having gone through failures of your own. What gave you kind of the gusto to pick yourself back up and go, no, I'm going to try again?
I think that's such a great question from the perspective of, everything we see, let's be honest, for the most part, everything we see in social media is somebody's perfectly polished front stage, right? I mean, it's just, and I don't know if you're this way because you're a guy and I'm a girl and I know that I'm this way, but like I choose the pictures before they get posted on social media, right? I'm like, oh, wait, do I look right in this picture? Right. So I know everyone else for the most part is doing that. What filter should I use? Does that make me look better or whatever? So I think that we find ourselves in this comparison society all the time and we're all susceptible to it. And even those of us that try really hard to kind of like block it out as best we can, we're still susceptible to it. I mean, I'm in a mastermind with a group of other business owners and we were just on Sunday having a whole conversation in a text thread about that, about what that looks like, about feeling like, we know we're making great progress, but we should be further along and we're comparing ourselves to others. And I think that what we lack is some transparency of what it looks like. I love it when an entrepreneur who is successful says, yep, and it took me 17 years to get here. Like, I think there's nothing better than hearing an entrepreneur say that. So for me, with my business failure, and it wasn't one of those things where I started a business, I didn't know what I was doing, so to speak. I started a business and I fell into a trap, I think, that a lot of business owners fall into, which shortchanged how long my business actually would last. But it wasn't like my business failed in the first 18 months, which is the majority of when businesses will fail is in their first 18 months. I don't know the exact statistic, but, and then it's like, even a much larger percentage won't even make it to 5 years. And I made it to 4 years before my HR consulting business, which was my first business, actually failed. And I think that it's one of those things when we have to constantly remind ourselves of why we're doing what we're doing, why it matters to us, and to just kind of eliminate all the comparison that is out there in the world and not try to fall into that societal trap of constantly comparing ourselves to others, because somebody will always look better than you and someone will always have a better car than you. And you probably have a better car than everybody else, right? That's looking at you. So it's just kind of like that reminder of where we are in our journey and understanding that that's an okay place to be in our own journey. And then of course to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And the reality of what you just talked about, which is perspective of knowing where you are. I think for me, one of the biggest things is I don't really care what my competition is doing. I really am only comparing myself, or at least I try to, I should say, only compare myself to myself from a year ago. And so like, that's how we've grown over the past 20 years is people are like, what are your goals? And I'm like, well, I don't know. What did I do last February? Well, here's what I did. Okay, I want to beat that. That's it. Like, that's how it's always worked. And it's always worked well for me that way, at least up until a certain point. And, you talked about, entrepreneurs that took a long time to be successful. I love one of the things Dave Ramsey says. He says, I busted my tail for 20 years and then all of a sudden I was an overnight success.
Right.
And I think that's what happens. A lot of times people see these people pop up and they think, oh, wow, they're really successful. But what's happening behind the scenes is a whole different ballgame. One of the things you had mentioned was a mastermind group. That's something that I'm hearing come up a lot with successful folks. I'm involved with a couple of mastermind groups actually in different kind of communities. I'm curious what that looks like for you, how you got involved in that, and what kind of impact it's had on you and on your business.
I've been in a couple throughout the years, and this one is probably one of the better ones that I've been in, only because we are all in the same space. None of us are competitors of each other, but we all have businesses that used to be brick and mortar or some semblance. For some of us in the group, there's like this tiny piece that's still a brick and mortar. And I mean brick and mortar, not like a retail store. I just mean like a service-based, like providing a service to your clients. And we've all been moving into the online space over the last so many years. So there's a couple of us that are a little further ahead of where some of the other ones in the group are, but we all are in the same place of learning what it looks like to go from, in my case, I was a business and productivity coach. I grew my business by figuring out how to generate referrals without having to ask for them. Realized that was what made me different. And that's what all my clients wanted to learn. Started teaching that, and then realized I could help so many more people if I had an online program. And that would give me the ability to work with people all across the world. And we have students in my Growth by Referrals program in 7 different countries. And so what I needed was a space to be with other entrepreneurs who were in that same movement place and were trying to grow a business online, because growing a business online does look entirely different than, growing a coaching practice where I'm on the phone or over Zoom or face-to-face with my clients and where I'm trading dollars for hours. And there's different folks in the group from kind of all walks of life. We are all female. I have been in mixed gender masterminds before. I think either are fine. I don't have a preference. It just so happens this one happens to be all females. And there's 7 of us and we're spread out all across the country. And we get together once a month. And this is a free one. Like it's a volunteer driven, like one of the ladies that I was in another mastermind with, we were having a conversation and she was like, this mastermind is great, but I spend most of my time talking to you 3 because we're building online businesses and the other ones aren't. And I was like, then let's create that. So we kind of just created that and added some more people that we knew to the mix. And it's been great. We do a lot of learning and sharing together, which is wonderful. But we do a lot of like helping remind each other how far we've come and picking each other up and like, hey, you're actually better at this than you think. It's like having your own little support team. But at the same time, we're not afraid to call each other out, like do the work, right? I mean, sometimes we find ourselves having that conversation with each other as well. It's just I think masterminds are a great safe space for you to like let your hair down, so to speak, or let the warts show when you feel like it's going to be in that safe space and you can have that conversation. Because the truth is, I don't care how successful you are. And I don't care if you're the most successful person in the room or the least successful person in the room. We all have doubts. We all have fears. Dave Ramsey to this day, right? He still has a doubt. He wakes up and there is something that can still rattle him the same way it can rattle us. And so I think having that space to have those conversations as we grow is really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's great. One of the things that people say a lot, especially in ownership of companies or entrepreneurship in general, is it's lonely at the top. And that is or can be true. I know for me, like for ages, especially as I started to grow a team, all I really wanted was to just be one of the team. And at some point you realize, like, when you're the one who has the ability to say, hey, you don't have a job here anymore, when you're the one who signs the front of the paycheck, you don't get that. You don't get the opportunity to just be one of the team. You have to lead. And as a result, that can be lonely. But I think something like a mastermind group, when you're putting yourself in other scenarios where other people are in that, it doesn't have to be lonely at the top. You choose to put yourself in those environments. And I think it's great too that you mentioned, like, the group that you're in is a free volunteer driven group. These don't have to be things that cost tens of thousands of dollars like you hear about sometimes. Sometimes just getting the right people together in the mix and having consistency of, hey, we're going to consistently meet on these dates at these times has a huge impact. I want to specifically transition a little bit because you mentioned it, and I want to kind of narrow in on it. You talk about this idea of generating business through referrals without asking. Number one, I love referrals. I think that they're the still the best way to build any kind of business anywhere. And I run a digital marketing agency. So people are like, well, isn't that in contrast with what you do? I'm like, no, it's not. Our job is to help amplify those things in the right places. My uncle always told me, he said, look, just do a great job for somebody, ask them to tell somebody else, you'll never run out of business. That's been true. But in his part, he said, ask them to tell someone else and you'll never run out of business. You say you can generate referrals without asking. So what does that look like?
Yeah, it's interesting when I have an opportunity to talk to people about my methodology and what it looks like to generate referrals without asking. There are usually two types of people, right? There's your uncle who I would have a conversation with and he'd be like, nope, what are you talking about? Asking is fine. Like, it works great. And then there's what I like to call everybody else. That's like, it could work. I think it's great that it works for you. I'm just uncomfortable doing it. And what I realized when I kind of started paying attention to how referrals work and looking at the human dynamic and the psychology behind why referrals typically happen, you can really start to see and unpack why it makes, I think, in my opinion, a majority of the people uncomfortable. No matter the scripts that you give them or the tactics you tell them to use or how easy breezy you tell them to ask, there's a fundamental issue about asking somebody else to refer someone to you that makes a large majority of people uncomfortable. Mm. And a lot of people will tell you, if they're in the space where they believe you should ask for a referral, their advice back to you has always been, you just need to ask. And if you're not comfortable asking, well, then you don't get any referrals. Because if you won't ask, you can't receive. And what I find through that process is that cuts out like 99% of us. It's like, okay, great. So I won't ask, so I can't receive. Great. That means I just have to wait and hope those referrals will just show up sporadically or randomly. And I just found like that was me. Like, I love receiving referrals too. And I think I do wonderful, great work. And I received referrals, but they were sporadic. It was like the cream on the crop, right? It was like, it was just like, oh, look at this. It's just, this great thing that happened that I wasn't expecting. But when I started studying them and realizing how and why they work, I started actually doing things to take care of my referral sources, the people who were already kind of sporadically referring me, to take care of them. And I noticed that as I started to take better care of them in specific ways and planted some specific language with what I call referral seeds, I started to get more and more referrals. And I realized, you know what? Asking and not asking, the way that I teach it, have one thing in common. And that is obviously being able to be front and center with the referral source. I just do it in a way that allows some people to feel more authentic, to really focus in on the relationship that they appreciate, that referral source sending them business and taking care of them. And then subtly planning in language that allows us to kind of get that end result. Obviously, we're ultimately after, which is to receive referrals. But it comes from a place of feeling really authentic and knowing that it fits who we are and our values. Like, we get to take care of people that are taking care of us. Of course, we should be taking care of them. And so it kind of feeds together on all those principles. That becomes really just a process that business owners need to put in place within their business. It's not complicated. It's not hard. Most people who go through it, they're like, wait, that's it? I'm like, yep, that's it. And they're like, I can do this. I'm like, yeah, just the same way that somebody who's comfortable asking can go ask. If you're not comfortable asking, for 30, 40 years, there hasn't been another way. And now there is. There is another way to generate referrals with consistency, with a level of volume, depending on what your needs are, without having to ask. There's still work involved. You still have to, if you're going to ask, you have to go ask somebody. If you're not going to ask and you're going to follow my methodology, you still have work to do. There's no easy button. There's no silver, like silver bullet that's going to make everything easy, but it's just another way for people who aren't comfortable asking. And I just think it's really long overdue. And I think if I had had my system today that I teach, my very first business that failed never would have failed.
That is awesome. It makes me think about one of the reasons a lot of people fail in business is sales in general, because they started doing whatever it is that they do, and they're good at baking cupcakes, for example, and they started cupcake making business because everybody said your cupcakes are the best. You should start a cupcake business. They do. But then like actually having to sell those things or get in front of people to do them. And that's a very simple example, but if it's a more complex sell, it's a whole different ball game. And they think, well, I'm really good at this thing, but selling is a whole different ball game. So how can referrals or the right referral system that you're talking about help somebody kind of get over that and kind of stop having to sell, at least in the traditional sense of prospecting and all that kind of stuff, and instead lean on their referral system? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because it's true. Like, that's what I always tell folks is that there's a lot of different things you can do to grow your business. I call it having like a number of tools right in your toolbox when it comes to your business development strategy or your sales strategy. And there are things you need in the marketing side, and there are things you need in the prospecting side. What I teach, though, is we need a third piece to that toolbox, which is the referral side, because the mentality you bring to the table when you are trying to generate referrals, everything about it, the language, the mindset, who you're speaking to, everything's different from marketing and prospecting. And it's that sales component that most people, and you're right, it's kind of like Michael Gerber's E-Myth Revisited, right? I mean, it's that idea that I became a productivity coach because I was really good at productivity. Like, people would be like, hey, teach me how you do that. And then I got certified, and then I built a business on it. But I still had to figure out how to run a business, right? And I still had to figure out making sure that the sales component was a part of it. I don't ever tell somebody, hey, you can, implement any type of referral strategy and then never have to worry about having a website and never have to worry about ever going to another networking event. I would never say that, because I think you need a well-rounded toolbox of the different things you have that will allow your business to grow in different ways. Same way with me, right? I'm here being interviewed by you on a podcast, right? That's part of a strategy for me in terms of being able to reach more people. I know the best type of people who roll into my business are going to come by referrals, but others come in other ways as well. And so it's an important part to understand that people who know that they're really good at something, but then they have to go sell, they're always looking for the easy way to do that. And I always tell them, hey, you've got to have some marketing, some basic marketing. You really need to have some basic prospecting. And then you need to have, a referral plan in place that allows you to receive referrals from people you're going to ultimately take care of. But people are attracted to me. And I get this a lot, particularly from my service business-based businesses, like my CPAs, my attorneys, my business coaches, consultants, things like that. They come to me and they say, or like my interior designers, home builders, they come to me and they say, it doesn't feel like selling. I'm like, you still have to know how to close them when you receive that referral. So there is a part of the sales strategy that still exists in this. I teach a very specific way to close a referred prospect. But the idea here is that they are attracted to me because it doesn't feel like sales. But I'm also one to be like, but you still need a website, and you probably still need some type of marketing behind it. And you need to do some prospecting as well while we're building up your referral strategy. But ultimately, referrals do drop into your lap, and they are the easiest types of prospects to close, and they're always yours to lose. But there's still a sales component to it, and you still have to be able to cultivate and nurture relationships with those referral sources to get there. So it is true. I mean, a lot of people are definitely attracted to my methodology because it doesn't feel like sales. It doesn't feel like sales to me. It's great. But at the end of the day, there's still work to be done, and it still fits into a larger sales strategy.
That's really good. A couple things that stood out. One, I really like that you knew that was an E-Myth reference about the cupcakes. So that's the plus one for you. And
well, actually, he tells a story about pies, and you use cupcakes. Pie.
Yeah, but it's the same. It's the same like idea.
I wasn't going to call you out.
I always forget, but it's a baking. It's a baking.
It is baking. You're right. So, it's something we get to eat.
That's right. And if you're out there listening and you haven't read that book and you want to be an entrepreneur, that's on the top 5 must-read list for sure. A couple things that you said, now I've distracted myself. A couple things that you said that really stood out to me. The first was really about having like this system for referrals. And I think back to early on in business, and I remember this like old school, like paper-based ask for referral type system that was, again, my uncle used to do. He taught me a lot about business when I was a kid. And we don't do that anymore. We do get business from referrals. Our best clients usually come from referrals, but I'm sitting here internalizing thinking, but we really don't, as much as I push intentionality and like having a plan for things and executing against that plan consistently over time, after 20 years in business and being a multi-million-dollar business, we still don't really have a consistent plan for referrals. And that makes me think, how much business are we missing by not having that in place, missing the best clients even as a result? So when you first start working with somebody and you're teaching them the 5-step system that you have, what is it that's kind of like the big aha moment for them that they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe we haven't been doing this? Like, what's the biggest thing that kind of stands out to folks?
Yeah, and it's typically step 1. So, and I'm happy to break down those 5 steps so your audience can kind of have an idea of how the system and the pieces kind of fit together. But I always tell folks, step 1 is the most important. It is also the one, and most people are like, you put the most amount of work up front. Like, aren't you supposed to ease us into the system? And I'm like, here's the thing. I mean, I am okay with separating the men from the boys, and I'm okay with separating, right, the women from the girls. The truth is that if you want to have referrals arrive in your business on a consistent basis, and let me just give a little example so people understand what I'm talking about. It's like for me taking an on-hold marketing company that sounds like that on-hold that you listen to, right, when you're on hold, taking them from 40 referrals a year, pretty much on average, and trying to get them to 80 referrals. That was our goal, was to double them from 40 to 80. And in their first like 8 months, they hit 187.
Wow.
So there's this idea behind, like, when I tell folks, yeah, the most amount of work is up front, and I'm about to explain it to you, I want you to know what it looks like if you can get past this most amount of work, right? Or and that's for a larger company that had capacity and team members and things, but it's like looking at the solopreneur attorney. That's like, hey, we get 2 or 3 referrals a year, and in 2 years getting them to 40 referrals a year.
Wow.
So that's so when I say, yeah, here comes some work, I just wanted to put it in context. If the reward is there, the results are on the back end, they're there, but here's the work. The very first step, let me make a disclaimer first. I'm assuming you do great work. I'm assuming that you have what I call a sticky client experience, and that you are worthy of referrals, because the work you do speaks for itself and people would want to talk about it. They're not embarrassed, right, to tell somebody else about you. So that's an assumption I'm going to make when you start into my system. If that's not your reality, we have some other work to do before we can really start getting you referrals, because I believe that everybody deserves referrals. You're just not owed them. So because we're not owed them, we actually have to be willing to do a little bit of work. So step 1 is it's actually identifying who your referral sources are. And that's a really important piece that most people would prefer to skip, because it means they actually have to go back and pull the data to know who's actually been referring them. 9 times out of 10, when somebody goes back through and pulls the data of where their clients came from, and then looks for those clients that were sent by referral sources, and then can identify the first and last name of each of those referral sources, 2 things typically happen when they're looking at that list. They're surprised by who's not on it, because we use a lot of anecdotal evidence in our life to make ourselves feel good about the decisions that we make, right? So they feel like, hey, I spend a ton of time with Tommy, and he's definitely referring me. We talk business all the time. He mentions he's talking about me. He mentions he refers me. And then you pull the list of clients and you're like, oh, not one single one has actually come from Tommy. But wow. And the other thing there is so it's who's not on the list. The other surprise is who is on the list that they've probably been ignoring. And so then they look at that list and like, oh my gosh, Tommy's not sending us anybody. And I spend like every week, right, grabbing a beer with him after work. And then all of a sudden here's Sally over here, who's like consistently giving you referrals every year. And it's not that you don't thank Sally, right? And it's not that you don't appreciate Sally, but you're not paying attention. You're not paying attention. So what is it that Sally's not sending you, right, that you could be leveraging? So there's always this concept that people have to understand, is that when I tell people how to take care of their referral sources, I don't teach the how until you have identified the who. So who are your referral sources? The easiest way to do this is to go through your list of clients. Now, if you have a list of prospects that did not become clients, I want you to pull that list too. A lot of people don't have it if they don't have some type of CRM, client relationship management tool, or some type of database. But if you can pull at least your clients that were, and all your clients, go back, depending on how many years you've been in business, go back 3 years at least for, I would prefer more, but like I had somebody I worked with, they went back to 1998. I was like, well, too far. Too far.
Back it up.
Right. I was like, I'm so sorry you pulled all that data. And of course he had a database. He was like, I just pushed a button. Right. Yeah. I'm like, thank you, because so many people don't. I mean, I work with a lot of multi-million-dollar businesses, and I'm like, yeah, how do you not track this information? So it's really important. And here's the thing. And if you just felt like I judged you, that wasn't my intention. If you don't track this information, now you know, so start, right? Like start tracking your data. You should know when a prospect rolls in the door where they came from. And it's not just that you met them at a networking event or someone on your team met them at a networking event. It's which networking event did you meet them at? It's not that just someone rolled in through a Google ad. Hopefully it's which Google or Facebook ad did they roll through in, right? It's not that so-and-so was just referred to you, it's who referred them to you. So capture the detail of the source as well. Once you have all your clients, 3 years, let's just say for sake of argument, 3 years of data of your clients, You've gone through, you've identified where they have come from. You're just looking for the clients that were referred to you. And then you have the name of the referral source for each client they referred. And then you can start paying attention, like, who sends me one a year, right? Who sent me once 5 years ago and never received another referral? Who sends me 2 or 3 or 10 or 12 every year? So in some cases you may have levels, and because you'll have people who send you more consistent referrals than others. Lots of business owners won't in the beginning. That's one of the things that I teach people is as you start receiving more referrals, you need to start differentiating how you treat your referral sources. And so it's one of those things, is like, we just need to start with the who's been referring you in the past. If you go through this exercise and you're like, okay, nobody refers me, it's not the end of the world, right? I wouldn't tell you to continue on with steps 2 through 5. What I would tell you to do is you need to back up and you need to start turning people into referral sources. And of course I have a way that I teach that, but what it really comes down to is find the people that you think should be referring you and then go take care of them. Go do something for them, nurture that relationship with them and make it about them, and be consistent in that. Not just one time and be like, okay, where's my referral? Because remember, I'm teaching you not to ask. So it's a little bit of a slow burn in the beginning, but the relationship that is created is very authentic. And so it has sustainability to last. And that's really important. But back to the people who are going to go through their list of clients and identify their referral sources, that's step 1. Here's my guarantee promise to you. If you go through that step and you do it correctly, right? And I outline exactly how to do this step actually in chapter 8 of my book, Generating Business Referrals Without Asking. So you can go back and go right through that information. Most people are like, wait, that's a module in your paid program, but yet you give it away in your book. And I always say, yes, because I know if you won't get past that step, you're not going any further anyway. Right. So what does it matter? So if you can identify who your referral sources are, I also know it's going to motivate you. It's going to motivate you to be like, wait a minute, there is gold here. This is my list of gold, right? And there is gold here that I can actually take care of these people better in a very specific way and use very specific language and get more referrals. And that's going to be a great way to continue to grow your business. And so once we know who our referral sources are, you never have to do this step again. So that's my promise. Go through the work, pull out the data. If you don't have the data, you're going to do a walk down memory lane. You're going to write this thing. You're going to pull out a list of your clients and try to remember, where you heard from them. Maybe you're going to go back into paper files or digital files. Maybe you'll email them and ask them, hey, do you remember how you heard about me? Maybe you'll find an email thread that'll mention it in the very beginning, calendar notes, something to try to compile where these people heard about you. And then from there, once we know who's been referring you, now we know what we're about to build because we know who we're going to build it for. So that's effectively step 1.
That's really good. And I want to reiterate something that's really important that you talked about there, which was feelings versus data. And I think I actually had this happen to us not that long ago. It was a few years ago. I had 2 guys on my team who did a lot of networking. They did some sales work. They kind of built relationships. And they were heavily involved in a local networking group. Each of them were in separate groups. And all 3 of us said we felt like it was worth the time. We felt like it was. There was a lot of activity. There were a lot of relationships, a lot of positive anecdotal evidence. But then we pulled up our system where we tracked sales and leads, which was Pipedrive at the time. Now we use HubSpot, but we pulled up Pipedrive. We pulled up the list. We sorted it by most valuable clients, and we looked at the top 25 clients for the past year, and only one of them came from all of this work that both of them were investing over this time period. And we both just sat there and looked at the screen like, oh my God, what in the world? We're spending so much time on this. And yet then we're like, well, these things right here came from these communities that we're involved with, and we're hardly even doing anything in there. And so that is so, so important. So I want to just double down and put 3 exclamation points on the end of it is you have to have the data. And if you don't have the data, start collecting it. I was just telling our team this morning, we're working on some profitability stuff for projects. And, 3 or 4, we've been in this for 20 years. And 3 or 4 years ago, I had none of this data, none of it. Right. And now I have 3 solid years of data. Well, I can make really good decisions now because I know exactly what the truth is, not how we feel about it. And gosh, that's so important. The other thing that makes me think about everything that you're talking about right now is the biggest thing people have a pain with business is running out of time. Like you hear, I don't have enough time in the day. I just need more hours. But the fact is, Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos and previously Steve Jobs and everybody else in the world, we all get the same 24 hours, but we're wasting so much time. And what I love about a system like yours is it sounds like the idea behind it is to go, hey, let's focus on the things that actually are working. And that's kind of what you're doing. So yeah, that was step one. Step one is know who you should be targeting, who's actually produced results. Let's go find those people. In the book, you have some real practical ideas about that. I don't have time to go through all 5 steps because people can go get the book, but let's tell us number 2 and just give us a little bit of teaser of what's next.
Perfect. Well, most people, when they hear me talk about step 2, they're like, why is this step 2? It feels like you just forced it in there and it doesn't really fit. But what I always tell folks is step 2 here's the thing. I believe that if you have the ability to identify who your referral sources are, and then you do step 3 and step 4, which is build out a plan of how you're going to take care of them, and then use the right referral seed language to generate referrals. It all comes from a place of authenticity, of you actually caring about these people who send you business. If you are dead inside and you don't care about the people who send you business, my process isn't going to work. So step 2 is here because it's almost a reminder to you that you are needing to show gratitude and gratefulness for what you are receiving. So step 2 is actually writing a handwritten thank you note every single time you receive a referral, like every single time. And so most people are like, well, I sent the text or I sent an email, and I'm like, who cares? It took you 12 seconds. I need you to spend 32 seconds and pull out a note card and write a handwritten note. And it's not about what you write, though there is in the book, I give exactly what your thank you card should say. It's not necessarily though about what you write. It's also about how that card makes them feel. And if you are in the habit of knowing who your referral sources are, and then properly, the way your mama taught you, right, properly thanking them when they send you a referral with a handwritten thank you note, then you're in a space for everything else to make sense that I'm going to teach, of understanding that, yeah, ultimately we are after more referrals. And ultimately, I do want you to go from 40 referrals to 187 or whatever your number is. I want you to hit your referral explosion as a calculation we do in my program, but I want you to hit that number, but I want you to do it from a place of understanding that these people make your life easier. And so I'm about to teach you how to make sure you take care of them. But it starts with some basic politeness, which is when you receive a referral, make sure you have an immediate follow-up process to send a handwritten thank you note. And don't you dare delegate that handwritten thank you note to someone on your team. You are capable of writing a thank you note. I don't care if they address it and lick the envelope for you and put the stamp on it, but you are going to write this note. And it's really, really important that that comes from a place of gratitude. That's what makes this whole process and system work. Because when you do step 3 and 4 and you start taking care of me as I'm referring you, right, I start feeling it. It starts building gratitude. And I feel like, oh my God, Jay really does care about me. And it's not just what the business I'm sending him, right? It's like he actually cares because he's taking time to invest in me. Yes, there's a whole process behind it with step 3, 4, and 5, but step 2 is getting your intention straight in your own mind and in your own heart that you are thankful for these people, and they at least, at a minimum, deserve a handwritten thank you note. To get more from them, they're going to need more than that. You can't have a referral explosion with thank you notes, but it does have to start with that.
Yeah, I think that's so important because it's so easy to, in our digital world, to just take the easy path and to feel like, well, like you said, I send a text, I send an email, I send them a Facebook message or a DM. And there is something so powerful now when people are not doing these things to have something tactile, a physical thing that you write on and send to them in the mail that they get. It has so much more impact because you think about how many emails and text messages do we get in a day that we're like, delete, and like quick scans, quick process. Some of us have the other people that are checking our emails for us, all that kind of stuff. So we might not even see it if it's just something super basic. But if it's a letter that has my name on it, it's going to come to my desk and I'm going to open that letter and I'm going to read it. And there is real impact there. And I think as simple as something like that sounds, the question that I always ask people is, but are you doing it?
And they're not.
Right. I do it occasionally, but I don't do it all the time.
Oh,
that's the
Jay.
key. I know. But that's just real truth, like I do it occasionally, but I need to have an intentional system behind it where it happens all the time. I think that's what you're talking about, is have a system that is consistent and works every single time.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just, we use a lot of if-then rules in my business. So like my assistant knows that if I receive a referral and I forward it to her, she knows instantly what to do. It goes on the master's in the database to be tracked. Then she responds back to me and she sends the referral source's address. So it is so simple and I can't have an excuse for not sending the thank you note. when that email comes back to me and it's got the address in there, it's like, okay, just print it out and I'll leave it sitting on my desk. And I don't like clutter. So if it's sitting on my desk, I will do whatever it takes to get it off my desk, and so I use myself against, right? I'm definitely using what my interesting parts are about myself against myself, right? So that I can make the habit happen and get that thank you note in the mail and out the door. So yeah, I mean, it's all about creating that. There's like these little points that you can create systems around that make something happen that we usually don't spend any time on, and we definitely should. So there, to your point, there is a step 3, a step 4, and a step 5. It's all in the books and people can go grab it, Generating Business Referrals Without Asking. But I really do think those first 2 steps, if those 2 resonated with you and that felt good, then you're probably going to like the rest of what you read, because it's all about taking care of your referral sources, the people who are growing your business. So why in the world wouldn't you want to take care of them?
Yeah. And I think the reality is most business owners do not have a clear system for this. I mean, I don't, and I've been doing this stuff since I was a kid. So the fact that I don't, I'm like, man, that feels really convicting. And I imagine a lot of people are thinking the same thing. And it's neither your intention or my intention to make anybody feel bad that's listening, but it is to kind of light a spark. And going back to what you were talking about earlier, I think this is really important. I want to say it again. You talked about, like, if you really care for people, like, this will work. And I think that's so important, because I always talk about that as it relates to sales. Is people don't like the idea of sales, usually because they've had an encounter with a bad salesperson. And I think that if you have a product or service that you really honestly believe and is going to help that other person overcome whatever the problem is that you're helping them solve, you're almost morally obligated to sell them into it, because it's going to be in their best interest. And the difference between persuasion and manipulation is, if I'm persuading you to buy something that I know is in your best interest, that's good because it's for you. If I'm manipulating you, I'm trying to convince you to buy something that's not in your best interest, and that's bad. And I think a lot of people have had that experience. And what you're talking about, you've mentioned this a few times. I want to hear what you mean by this. You talked about referral seed language. Talk a little bit more about like that. What do you mean by seed language?
Yeah, so that actually comes up in step 4. So, and let me just back up. So I'll talk a little bit about step 3 and step 4 kind of together, because they really go together. But to your point, you mentioned something about having a system for this. And that's actually what step 5 is. Like, what I teach with step 5 is how do we take this thing we just built? It's called a referral generating plan. But how do we take this referral plan we just built and then make sure we actually execute on it, and make sure that we systematize it? We call it processetizing it inside my program. I don't know if that's a word. I just like saying it, so I made it a word. And there's actually a chapter in my second book coming out that's like processetizing is in the title. I'm like, I wonder if the publisher will let me keep that. But so from that perspective, so there is a system behind this, so that it's not a cookie cutter approach, and it's not having everybody else do everything for you, but there is a way to delegate and to outsource and to make sure this becomes part of your workflow. So there is a system behind it, because I know we need that as busy business owners to get anything done. So that does exist. But step 3 and step 4 are really the meat and potatoes and the secret sauce. So step 3 is like, okay, you know who these people are. You know how to thank them properly when they send you a referral. What do you do in between receiving referrals from them that you can start taking care of them to cultivate more referrals from them? And so step 3 is really looking at, like, how am I going to take care of my referral sources for an entire year? So we build our plans out in kind of like a 1-year process, but we repeat it every year. Like, you can change things up, but you really build it for that 1 year, because this isn't a one-hit wonder, right? This is not like, I'm going to do one thing and the referrals are going to roll in and I never have to do anything again. No, like, this is consistently nurturing a relationship. So we call it outreach or touch points. When I teach it, we call it touch points, but it's this way that we're going to take care of our referral sources. And once we know who they are, it makes a whole lot more sense to figure out what is unique about them or unique about us that we want to highlight. What do these touch points look like? And then step 4 is actually the language that we use that allows us to plant referral seeds when we're sending that handwritten thank you note from step 2, or any of the outreach or touch points we're going to do within step 3. And so the language that we use is really based on what we're doing. But I'll give an example, because I think this will help your listeners a lot. Let me just go ahead. It's in the book too. They can get it if they don't capture, if they're, cutting the grass right now or something, when you're listening to this, or shoveling snow. But from the perspective of the easiest language I can give you to kind of show you how this works is what you should be writing in that handwritten thank you note when someone sends you a referral. Again, you don't just write notes and get a whole bunch of referrals. That's not how it works. You have to fit in step 3 and step 4. And then you have to create a process with it with step 5. But in that handwritten thank you note, the number one thing you need to be doing is you need to be thanking by name. So instead of just saying, hey, thanks for the referral, you need to say, hey, Jay, thanks so much for referring Stacey Randall to me, right? Thank you so much. So put my name in there. So it's like, hey, Jay, thanks for referring Stacey Brown Randall, right? Like remind you what you did,
Yeah.
right? And who you did it for. That is the use of the word referral is obviously one of the easiest ways to plant a referral seed. There are indirect ways to do it. So because you can't overdo this and then it becomes very obvious what your intentions are and it's not authentic or genuine anymore. So, but it's like, hey, Jay, thank you so much for referring Stacey Brown Randall to me, right? It's an honor and a pleasure to help the people you know and care about. If I can do anything to help you, please let me know. That's 3 simple sentences. You may have to hit rewind on this to hear me say it, but that was 3 simple sentences that goes into a thank you note. But to your point, when I receive that note and I read it, I realize, oh yeah, that is what I did. I did refer her to him, right? Or whatever the situation is. And then I usually keep it. And if it goes up on the board or it goes into a box, then when it gets moved again, it gets reread. And so it's there continuously being able to plant those referral seeds, but it's just thanking the person for exactly who they refer to you, which is why you have to track who these people are. You have to track the referral source and you have to track the client they referred. But that's just language in one place. There are so many other places we plant referral seeds. I mean, we plant them during the buyer's journey. We can plant them in any note that we're going to write and any outreach we're going to do as part of our 1-year plan of how we're going to take care of our referral sources. We can plant them with soon to be referral sources. People are trying to turn into referral sources. There are lots of opportunities to use referral seeds and to plant that language. What I teach my students is once you kind of know the formula, then you kind of just know how to use it that's going to work for you. There's just some basicness to understand of kind of how it works. And then it's like, oh, I get this. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do here. And as long as your intentions are true, that's when the system starts to work.
That's really helpful. I think that having those like very specific guidelines, and I'm definitely going to get a copy of the book. I think that those 5 steps make it so clear to know, okay, here's what I need to do. Let me just follow this system. There's no point in me trying to reinvent how this thing works. I can just copy a program that you already have put together. But in some of those, there might be nuances with regards to how I language, like you might have a here's how to write thinking note, but I might adjust a few things to make it sound like me. I always tell people, ignore the system, but have a system. And what I mean by that is basically just because you do something in a specific way or I do something a specific way, doesn't mean they have to exactly do that. But do that unless you know you have a better way. And I know for me right now, I don't have a specific way to do this, so I can just follow your way. And then if I need to adjust it along the way, I will. So I want to change.
Always say that. I always tell people, like, I write a certain way. I write very gender neutral and very like where it would be normal and comfortable, but it has to sound like you. So change it if it doesn't sound like you.
So we're almost out of time, but I want to shift gears just a little bit because I always ask this question to every single podcast guest because it's really important to me, and it's about work-life balance. Now, I don't really like that word usage. I don't really believe that's what it is, but I want to hear, 1, what do you even like believe about the idea of work-life balance? And 2, like, you got more going on than just your work. So how have you over time learned to go, hey, let me put all these things in the places where I need them to be so I'm not destroying one thing at the cost of another? What does work-life balance mean to you?
Yeah, so I hate that term as well. I think it's even more, and just this coming from a female perspective, I think it's even harder from a female perspective because of expectations that we have. But I'm a wife and I want to stay married forever. And we have 3 kids. 2 are biological and 1 is our nephew that 4 years ago we took custody of. So we have 3 kids. My husband works. He's owned his own business for a number of years. So we're moving in a lot of different directions. We've got 2 middle school boys and a daughter in elementary school. And there's a lot of moving pieces and parts. And somehow I let my family talk me into a puppy this year, which I am totally regretting, even how cute she is, totally regretting. So I think for me, what I've learned is there's a couple of things that I always kind of live by, and I've had to learn them over time. But one is shrink the container. And so for me, when I shrink the container, I don't allow myself to say, I can do that later, because later becomes in the evening when I should be with my family, or on the weekends when I should be relaxing or spending time with my friends and family. And so I try to say, like, there isn't a later. It's shrink the container, right? I try to get my most productive work done when I need to, in between the hours of dropping my children off at school and picking my daughter up, because my boys come home about an hour and 10 minutes later. But like, from that idea is like really being focused in on what is my most important thing and not allowing myself to say, I can do it later. Because the minute you say later, you have literally just increased the container of places and time in which you will do work. And if you shrink the container and say, nope, got to be done by 4, nope, got to be done by 2:30, whatever it is, it forces you to just move a little quicker and be a little bit more intentional about what you're choosing to work on. I am not perfect at it. There are lots of times I work nights and weekends when I wish I didn't, but I am definitely much better than I used to be.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I have a ton of little ones. I have 5 kids. My 2 youngest are actually adopted. And we do not have a puppy. I've not been talked into that foolishness yet, although they have tried many, many times. And even my wife is slightly on board. I'm like, babe, what are you thinking? Like, there's no way we can handle this right now.
Yes.
But I love that idea of shrinking the container. I think that's a great way to put that in perspective. Going, no, these are the boundaries that I'm going to put on this thing. Because otherwise, when you run your own business, especially when you love what you do, like I love the work that I do. I could work all day long, like 18 hours a day, and I would be fine. Like I would enjoy that.
Yes.
But I also have other responsibilities. Number one, other people I actually love and care about. And so like for me, one of the kind of guiding principles is basically eat dinner with my family. Like that's like a thing. And so what that means doesn't mean I always do it. I'm not one of those people that really believes in always and never. It's usually somewhere in between. But for me, it's a guiding principle to go, hey, if I'm going to miss dinner because of travel or because of a client dinner or something else, is it really worth it? Like, is it really worth it? And I have to ask those questions. And what you've done with that idea of shrinking the container is just that, which is, no. Here's the time I have available. And what I often find interesting is when we have those constraints, even if they're artificial constraints, our brains somehow manage to get a lot more done in some of those time periods. And if we go, well, I've got all day, and then all day goes by and you're like, I've not done anything,
Yeah, that's so very true.
All right. So we're going to wrap up. I want to hear if you had to think about talking to a new business owner, they've been in business less than 5 years. They're trying to make it work. They're trying to build a business that lasts. What is that guiding principle that you want to leave them with? Just say, hey, if you want to last in business, think about these things.
Oh my gosh. I need a whole episode.
I know.
To talk about all the things. You know what? One of the things that I learned 3 significant lessons when my first business failed, and that I put into practice for making this business so much more successful. And we've talked about one of them, which is my concept around referrals without asking, because that's how I figured out how to touch business development every day. That was the lesson learned. And what that looked like for me was creating a system to generate referrals because that fit who I am and be able to do that without asking. But one of the other really important lessons that I learned was protecting your mindset. Unfortunately, no matter if you come from a family of entrepreneurs like I do, and so they get it when you decide to go out on your own, there will always be the naysayers. There will always be even some well-intentioned meaning people who say things to you that if you allow those things to take root in your mindset when you are trying to build a business or grow it to the next level, that will not be helpful. And you have to protect your mindset. You have to get back to reminding yourself continuously and constantly why in the heck you decided to get on this entrepreneurial roller coaster, knowing that eventually the ride will not be so up and down and it will level out and you will master it and you can control it. But you have to protect your mindset because there are going to be people in your life that, even the people who love you the most, that maybe just don't get it. And when things get hard, they're gonna be like, oh, see, I told you, you should just stay at that, safe W-2 that was probably gonna lay you off in a year or two anyway, right? Or whatever, or that you felt dead in. Protect your mindset. Figure out what that means for you, whether that's who you listen to, whether that's how you spend time with God, whether that's meditating, whether that's the podcast you listen to, the music you allow to infiltrate your brain. But turn on a tape. Yeah, because I'm a child of the 80s and we listened to tapes back then, right? Turn on a tape that plays the right message that reminds you why you're doing what you're doing, regardless of how hard it is or regardless of who doesn't understand.
I love that. And it made me think about, actually, there's one of my old favorite speakers, a guy named Zig Ziglar, I'm sure you're familiar with. He used to say this. He'd say, people always tell me, actually he'd say it in a Southern drawl, so people always tell me that when they feel kind of down, they put in one of my tapes and it makes them feel better. And I always say, well, I don't know why you wait until you're down to put in one of my tapes. You don't wait until your car's out of gas to put gas in it. And I'm like, well, every now and then that might happen. But it's like such a great principle. And that's basically what you're saying is like what we put in here has so much impact. And I think what I've had to learn too is it's not even just what we put in, but what we say to ourselves is a record that gets played over and over and over again. And those words have real impact in our lives. So thanks for that. I think that's wise counsel for everybody. So if people want to find more about you and find you online and find your book, where can they do that?
Absolutely. So my home base is staceybrownrandall.com. Stacey is spelled with an E. I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes. But staceybrownrandall.com is the home base. On there, you can find lots of information. But my book is available wherever books are sold. It's called Generating Business Referrals Without Asking. And that is my first book. Book number 2 will be out probably fall of 2020. And that's going to be on sticky client experiences and how to build those even as a small business owner. So any of those resources are available on my website. You can find my book as well. And there's lots of downloads and quizzes you can take to figure out how good you are at generating referrals. Lots of information there.
Awesome. I think this episode is going to be really helpful for people. I think the book is going to be really helpful. I'm going to go buy my copy right now. Generating Business Referrals Without Asking by Stacey Brown Randall. Stacey, thank you so much for being on the show today. You really helped me, and I believe you're going to help a lot of folks who listen to this podcast.
Thank you, Jay, for having me.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.